So, hello, this is lecture 2-3 for biology. It's covering carbon compounds, and we'll be talking a lot about carbon. So, why are we talking about this element carbon? We've talked a lot about other materials, we've talked about water. Why is carbon so special? Carbon has a unique sort of valence configuration. Do you remember what valence was? It's the outermost layer of electrons. Carbon just so happens, by nature of where it is on the periodic table and how many protons and electrons it has a unique setup where it has 4 unpaired valence electrons. Let me show you. Let's make this our nucleus of our carbon, and then we should have 6 electrons because carbon is 6 on the periodic table. So we have 2 in the inner ring, and then on our outer ring we have 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, we can hold a total of 8 in this valence level, and that means I would like to pair up, I'd like to pair up, I'd like to pair up, I'd like to pair up. These two actually should be drawn paired up. What this means is because on my valence outer layer, I have lots of room to bond with other atoms. So I could form bonds with something else. I could form a bond with hydrogen here. I could form a bond with hydrogen here, here, and here. And then you could all of a sudden form this nice hydrocarbon. Or you could maybe hook a carbon onto this and then just keep hooking on carbons and then hook on other things to that, let's say. So because of carbon's outermost valence configuration, electron configuration, it can form lots of different bonds. It can bond to itself, it can bond in long chains, or you can bond with other atoms like oxygen or hydrogen. So that makes carbon really useful. It's so useful that every living thing uses it. All living forms of life are carbon-based. They use molecules that are built from carbon as the backbone, as the scaffold, and then you attach other things onto this. Whether you're talking about making a carbohydrate, whether you're talking about building a protein, carbon is the backbone of that molecule. The other thing this allows us to do is once you do make a carbon molecule, let's erase this, you can link together small carbon molecules to make a bigger carbon molecule. So let's say we've got some segments of a simple sugar called glucose, C6H12O6. You'll remember that formula. It's very important in biology. So glucose. Let's say this is one molecule of glucose. Glucose is carbon-based because these 6 carbons form the backbone of this molecule. Well, organic molecules or carbon-based molecules have the ability to take these small units, small molecules, and start linking them together to build a bigger molecule. So this glucose can link up with another glucose and another glucose and another glucose. And then all of a sudden we have this really big molecule called a macromolecule. Right? Macro means big. It's not micro, it's not small molecules, it's macro, it gets really big. These individual units that we link together to form our big molecule are known as monomers, or one single part. So each of these is referred to as a monomer. Mono means one, right? So these are all single units, small, simple molecules that we get to link together. So collectively, each one of these is a monomer, and this thing as a whole, the whole thing, is called a polymer. Right? Poly means many. So think of it this way. Each one of these units this is like a train. The whole molecule, this big molecule, polymer, is like a big train. Okay? It's one train, but that one train is made up of multiple single cars. Each one of those cars is a monomer. Now here's the really great part of this, is that just like a train, you can hook things together and take those cars apart. On a monomer and polymer, once you have this big macromolecule, this polymer, you can take single units off of this or rehook units onto this. Okay, so that's really, really useful for living things. That allows us to build these big molecules like DNA by hooking together all these little monomers, right? It's like building a train or linking them together, right? So this is really important. Other examples of natural polymers would be like cotton is a natural polymer. Wood is an example of a natural polymer. DNA is a polymer. There's like most of your big complex living things are made of polymers. Other polymers that we create are like that polymer slime, the slime you make with the glue and everything, that's a polymer. They're all linked together, and so it's many units, monomers, make a polymer. Probably a synthetic polymer would be something like nylon, or any of your plastics are polymers as well. All right, so if we say that if you've got an organic compound or a carbon-based compound, you can take smaller units and then build larger units with those. Okay, we call those molecules that living things use that are carbon-based, we call those organic compounds. Not organic like is in the grocery store, but organic means, a chemical term, means it's made with carbon as the backbone of it. And you can do this kind of thing with it, which is why it's useful for living things. You can build big complex proteins like people, and everything else. People aren't a single protein, but we're billions of proteins all hooked together. So, okay. So let's talk about the organic compounds. Side note, hopefully you are following along on your lecture notes, because the slides that go along with this really parallels everything I'm going to write down. So I might not put everything up here, but I'm actually looking at the slides right down there as I'm doing this. So we are on the slide entitled Organic Compounds. There are four main organic compounds. We have our carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and your proteins. Now, these actually may look really familiar to you, at least most of these are, because if you look on the back of any sort of nutrition facts for food you eat, you're going to see carbohydrates, fats, lipids are fats, and then protein, right? They're all listed on the nutrition facts on any sort of food package. Now, you won't see nucleic acids. That's because we don't need to eat those to get those materials. We can build them ourselves, but you do need to get a certain amount of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, and we'll talk about why you need to do that. It's kind of inherent to because of how they're built. You want the monomers from eating that food, so you can take that chains and rings and whatever apart, and then recycle or reuse those monomers from carbohydrates and lipids and proteins to build your own carbohydrates and lipids and proteins. Okay? So that's really important. That's why we have to eat, is so we can get that stuff. That's why it's on the nutrition facts list. Let's start off by talking about carbohydrates. Everybody's favorite, right? So carbohydrates, otherwise known as the sugars. We all like sugar. Why do we like sugar so much, right? Carbohydrates, one of their primary roles is to provide energy. Right? We eat a bunch of sugary food, or we eat some bread or pasta, all of which are types of carbohydrates. They really give us a lot of energy. So one main role of a carbohydrate is to provide energy. They can also be used in a slightly different form as a structural component, like wood. Wood is a carbohydrate. It's made out of cellulose, which is a big polymer made out of simple sugars. We cannot break it apart, though. Because of the way it's built, it's really strong, really rigid, but you can't break it apart and get the energy back out. Now, if you burn wood, right? Anybody burn wood at your house for heat or have a campfire? You're releasing that energy in the form of heat and light. If we could eat a carbohydrate, we get to have cellular energy to power our bodies, right? So another role of carbohydrates is, other than provide energy is to provide structure. Now, it does not provide structure to us. We are not built out of like cell walls on our cells or any of our wood. So it does not provide us with structure. It provides us with lots and lots of energy. Okay, so how are these carbohydrates built themselves? Well, they are built out of monomers called monosaccharides. These are our monomers of carbohydrates. So if I want to start building a carbohydrate like pasta, okay, I can take some smaller simple sugars, which the monosaccharides are known as simple sugars like glucose or galactose or fructose, and I can start linking them together and I can build bigger and bigger materials. Like on the slides, I've got a picture of a big fat loaf of bread, right? So that's built of all those repeating units, and they're great at storing energy for us, right? Another common, polysaccharide or polymer of a carbohydrate is what's called starch. So starch is what you find in potatoes, pastas, grains, things like that. That is a really great source of energy for us, right? So carbohydrates, their monomers are monosaccharides, and they're going to provide energy and structure for living things. What about lipids? Lipids are really your fats and your oils, right? The only real difference between a fat and oil is how saturated or unsaturated it is, and that influences whether it's solid at room temperature or it's liquid at room temperature. Like take butter versus soybean oil or vegetable oil. One's liquid at room temperature, one really isn't. Okay, that's the difference between fats and oils. They're both lipids, they're both built in essentially the same way. So first off, what are lipids good for? Okay, well, living things, many living things, store energy in the form of lipids. Carbohydrates provide easy to get energy. However, animals especially, when they have excess energy, they will store things in the form of lipids. They also are very important in making like cell membranes, and then we'll talk about that in just a second. So use, let's see, store energy, long term, and they're also used in cell membranes. Which brings up a really important point. We all know, we've seen that we put some oil and water together, maybe it's in an Italian salad dressing or something like that, and everybody knows that oil and water does not mix. Okay, so one especially important property of lipids is they don't dissolve in water. This is important because they don't dissolve in water. They're really good to make the outer coating of your cells. All of your cells are coated with lipids. If they weren't coated in lipids, what would happen in your body? We've talked about earlier that your body's like 2/3 water. Your cells would dissolve if they could dissolve in water, but they can't because the outer part of them are made out of lipids which don't dissolve in water. So that's really useful as well. Okay, so those are all your different uses of lipids. What are your monomers of lipids? Your monomers are called the fatty acids. This should be easy to remember that fats are made out of fatty acids, right? And so these fatty acid chains can link together and they form your fats. Like humans and animals pass around fats in the form of what's called a triglyceride. It's 3 fatty acid chains linked together, right? Your cell membranes are made out of a phospholipid, which is 2 fatty acid chains joined together. Either way, we're linking together monomers, fatty acids, and we form these lipids, all these fats and oils. If you look on the lecture slides, there's a big molecule diagram there. That's one molecule of butter. And you'll see that it is got a bunch of carbons in these really long chains all linked together. That's why it has so much energy in it, by the way. Fats are over twice as energy dense as a carbohydrate. So if you had a pound of butter and a pound of pasta, there would be over twice as much energy in the pound of butter as the pound of pasta. So they're really good at storing a lot of energy because of all those carbon bonds in them. All right, on to nucleic acids. These are simple in some regards. Nucleic acids have one job. That's it. They only do one thing. Examples of nucleic acids are DNA and RNA, and what they do is they store information. Genetic information, right? So we talked about one of the characteristics of all living things is that they have DNA. You've got to have DNA so you can store information. We don't need to eat nucleic acids for like energy or anything like that. We have DNA in our cells that codes for all of our genome, our genetic information, to help run our body, run the machinery that keeps us alive. Okay, so nucleic acids, they are only there to store information. They don't do anything else. They are made out of monomers called nucleotides. We will spend a lot of time talking later on when we talk about genetics about nucleotides. It's very, very interesting. The order of the nucleotides that you're linking together, you're making your chain, if you will, of your polymer, the order in which those are linked together codes for your traits. So because my nucleotides got linked together in a certain order, I've got black hair, and I'm a male, and all those certain characteristics I have is all coded for in the sequence of your nucleotides. That's your genetic code. And that's what nucleic acid's job is to do. But that's its only job. Okay, final organic compound. Proteins. All right, so proteins do a lot of things, but primarily they're there to provide structure. You and I are built out of proteins, right? They are very much structural. Okay? They also can help take part in certain chemical reactions in the form of something called an enzyme, which we'll talk about in just a second, right? Proteins are built out of monomers called amino acids. Okay, so those amino acids are the units that get linked together to build a protein. So if you look at your slides, there's probably a picture of some steak and some meat and stuff right there. So let's take that steak. That steak is really just like a piece of muscle. That muscle is built out of proteins, different proteins like actin and myosin and these other really complex proteins that allow your muscle to like stretch and do what muscles do. Well, when you eat that muscle, you're going to go ahead and take that big polymer that we call a protein and you're going to take it apart. You're going to depolymerize it, rip those little train cars off, and then you're going to put those in your bloodstream. Okay? So you totally, like, you know the saying, you are what you eat? Well, here's how that's true. You're then going to send those little units to some cell somewhere in your body, maybe one of your muscle cells that needs to be repaired. You're going to be like, I need to build more muscle protein. So I need some building blocks to do it. And then you will use those amino acid molecules, those small monomers, and start linking them together, and you will build your own muscle out of those. You'll rearrange it into the order that you need to have to build your muscle, right? So kind of think of monomers like Lego blocks. They're totally reusable. You rip them apart when you eat something, and then you reuse those or reassemble those and build your own creation. In this case, your own muscle tissue instead of the muscle from that animal. You aren't directly using it, you rip it apart to its basic parts, and then you use those basic parts for yourself. Okay? You can see an image on the slides of all the different amino acids that you can find. They're just little molecules, but you can link them together in some really cool ways to make super cool proteins. We'll pick up next time talking about enzymes in section 2-4.